The East Room of the White House has always carried the weight of history. Crystal chandeliers hung above like frozen constellations, scattering light across polished marble floors that had seen decades of triumph and scandal. Cameras stood in every corner, their red lights glowing like unblinking eyes ready to capture every breath, every pause, every flicker of tension. Every seat was taken. Senators, governors, ambassadors, and journalists sat shoulder to shoulder, pressed into the room as if history itself had demanded their presence. Even a handful of students invited to witness democracy in action sat nervously at the back, clutching their phones wide-eyed at the gravity of where they were. The silence before the speeches was not empty. It was thick. You could feel it in the way people leaned forward, whispering in low tones, then falling quiet again. This was no ordinary dinner. This was a room dressed for history, waiting for a storm. At the head of the grand table, President Donald Trump sat rigid, his posture sharp as a drawn blade. His jaw was tight, his hands pressed flat against the polished surface, as though holding himself steady in a room he thought he commanded. Around him, aides leaned in, whispering quietly, their faces tense, eyes darting between cameras and the growing hum of anticipation. Across the room, former President Barack Obama prepared to take the stage. Dressed in a dark, perfectly tailored suit, he carried the calm of someone who had weathered storms before. His expression was composed, almost unreadable, but his presence alone seemed to shift the energy in the room. Each step toward the podium was deliberate, measured, a reminder that confidence never rushes. The audience knew these two men. They had seen their clashes in headlines and debates, had felt the weight of their differences in every policy and speech. But tonight, under the glittering chandeliers of the East Room, something was different. There was a quiet collective instinct humming beneath the silence. People leaned forward, holding their breath without meaning to. This wasn't just another political disagreement. Tonight promised confrontation. Tonight promised history. Barack Obama stepped up to the podium, his movements slow, deliberate, almost rehearsed, but his calm wasn't staged, it was earned. He rested both hands lightly on the polished wood, glanced briefly across the sea of faces, and then began to speak. His voice was steady, low at first, but carried effortlessly through the East Room. History, he began, will not judge us by the titles we hold or the power we claim, but by the choices we make when the nation needs us most. The words floated under the chandeliers, sinking into the marble silence. Every sentence seemed wrapped in velvet, yet beneath the softness there was steel. Obama spoke of unity, of putting the country before personal pride. He reminded the room that the strength of America didn't rest in one man, one administration, or one party, but in the collective responsibility of its leaders. And yet, for anyone listening closely, the undertone was impossible to miss. Each phrase felt aimed like an arrow, its tip honed by years of quiet rivalry. The presidency, he said softly, isn't about the person who holds it, it's about the people we serve. A few heads nodded instinctively. Others froze, lips tightening, eyes darting sideways toward Trump. At the head table, the president's jaw flexed, fingers drumming sharply against the surface. Every guest could feel it now, a slow, invisible current shifting beneath the room. Obama wasn't shouting, wasn't provoking, but each sentence landed like a quiet strike, and everyone knew exactly where those strikes were aimed. At the head table, President Donald Trump sat motionless, or at least he tried to. But his body betrayed him. His index finger began tapping against the polished wood, a restless rhythm that grew sharper with each passing second. His jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin, pale line. His eyes narrowed, and sharp stayed locked on Obama. It wasn't the stare of casual attention, it was a storm gathering behind glass. Around him, his aides shifted nervously in their seats. One leaned in, whispering something quickly into his ear, but Trump didn't respond. Another stole a glance at the cameras lined against the walls, their red lights glowing steadily, recording every detail, every breath. The weight of the room began to change. Guests could feel it, a heaviness crawling across the East Room like an approaching thundercloud. Journalists typed furiously but kept one eye on Trump, their instincts honed to sense when a headline was about to write itself. Obama, still at the podium, continued speaking calmly, each word carefully measured, each pause deliberate. The contrast between the two men became painfully clear. One was water-steady, unshaken, and the other fire barely contained. The tension was no longer subtle. It was visible, alive, breathing through every nervous glance, every shifting chair, every uneasy whisper. People in the audience didn't know when, but they knew something was coming. And when it came, it wouldn't be small. The tension finally snapped. With a sudden violent motion, Trump shoved himself up from his chair. The legs of the chair screeched against the marble floor, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the East Room like glass shattering in a cathedral. Heads jerked toward him instantly. Conversations died mid-breath. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Then Trump's hand came up his finger, stabbing the air, pointing directly at Barack Obama. His face burned crimson, his chest heaving beneath the tailored suit. The sound of his voice followed raw, unfiltered, and loud enough to make the chandeliers tremble. "Get out!" The words exploded through the room like thunder rolling off stone. Cameras jolted into focus, red recording lights blinking furiously. Journalists scrambled for their pens, their laptops, their phones desperate to catch every fraction of a second. Guests gasped audibly. A senator from Arizona froze mid-bite fork suspended in the air. One European ambassador leaned toward his colleague, whispering under his breath. Did he really just say that Obama didn't move? Not an inch, not a blink. He stood still, one hand resting on the podium, his expression calm, as though the storm had erupted around him, but not within him. The contrast was electric. On one side, a man burning with fury. On the other, a man anchored in silence. And in between them, the East Room itself seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew without a doubt this night had changed. The sound tore through the East Room like a cannon blast. "Get out!" 3 words, sharp, heavy, unpolished, slammed against the marble walls and seemed to echo endlessly beneath the glittering chandeliers. It wasn't just loud. It was raw, volcanic, stripped of every layer of diplomacy the room had been built to protect. For a split second, the entire room froze. You could almost hear the silence collapsing in on itself. Journalists jolted upright in their seats, fingers trembling as they hammered at keyboards, snapping photos, hitting record on every device they had. Camera flashes burst like lightning, bouncing off polished marble floors and the ornate ceiling. A European ambassador leaned toward his colleague, his voice low, almost reverent. Did he really just say that? Across the tables, a senator stopped mid-bite fork, suspended in midair, eyes locked on the 2 men now standing at opposite ends of the moral spectrum. A young student seated in the back row, one of only a handful invited to witness this historic unity night, clutched her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The red recording icon blinked furiously on her screen. She would later whisper to a friend, "I knew I was watching history, but I didn't think it would feel like this." Trump's face burned crimson, his chest heaving, shoulders squared like a man ready for battle. His fingers stayed pointed, unshaken, demanding dominance. Obama, by contrast, stood perfectly still. Not a twitch, not a blink. His hand rested lightly on the podium, as though he was anchored not just to the wood beneath him, but to something deeper, to composure itself. The tension became something you could feel on your skin. It wasn't just political anymore. It was primal. One man shouted to command the room. The other didn't need to. The explosion had come and gone, but the aftermath that was louder than the shout itself. Obama didn't move. Not a blink, not a twitch, not even the subtle shift of weight from one foot to another. He stood perfectly still, one hand resting lightly on the polished podium, the other at his side. His calmness wasn't passive, it radiated control. That silence was deafening. Under the chandeliers, you could hear everything now, the faint hum of the cameras, the quickened breaths of nervous aides, the soft creak of leather chairs as guests leaned forward without meaning to. It was as if the entire East Room had been suspended in a vacuum, everyone trapped in Obama's composure. The more he stayed still, the more the tension tilted in his favor. Power has its own language, and tonight it wasn't volume, it was presence. Journalists froze mid-keystroke, instinctively lowering their hands. Even the clicking of cameras slowed. They knew this moment needed no interruption. They were witnessing the kind of control that couldn't be faked, the kind that turns a room without a single word. Near the head table, Trump was still standing, chest-heaving, face flushed with heat. His finger remained pointed, but the effect was already unraveling. Every second of Obama's silence made the outburst behind him feel smaller, thinner, cheaper. Somewhere in the back, a student whispered, barely audible, "Why isn't he saying anything?" A seasoned senator leaned over and murmured, "Because he doesn't have to." And in that moment, the crowd understood it too. Leadership doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it lets the silence speak. The silence had stretched so long it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Then finally Obama spoke. His voice was calm, steady, almost disarmingly soft. "This room," he said, pausing just enough for the words to land, "doesn't belong to you." A collective inhale rippled through the crowd. Trump's face twitched, but Obama wasn't done. "It belongs to the American people." It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a roar. It was worse, it was undeniable. A statement so measured, so unshakable, it shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just silence hanging heavy, like a verdict delivered. Then somewhere near the back, the first clap broke through, another followed, and then another. Within seconds, the East Room erupted into applause, but it wasn't wild, chaotic cheering. It was measured. It was respectful. People weren't applauding drama. They were applauding dignity. Obama didn't smile, didn't bask in it. He simply lowered his gaze slightly, as though to remind everyone that this wasn't about him either. This was about something bigger: the office, the institution, the people watching at home. Across the aisle, Trump remained frozen, his lips pressed into a thin, pale line. His outburst still hung in the air, but it was already fading. The applause wasn't his to claim. History wouldn't remember the yell. History would remember the reply. The applause was still echoing when Trump snapped. His chair screeched backward, his face flushed deep crimson. He jabbed a finger across the room, his voice cutting like shattered glass. "This is a setup," he roared. "You came here to humiliate me on national TV." Gasps rippled through the press pool. Camera shutters went wild, catching every flicker of his rage. Behind him, one aide tried to touch his arm, whispering something about calming down, but Trump yanked away. "Cut his mic," he barked, slamming a palm on the podium. "Get security in here now." The demand hung in the air like a threat no one wanted to answer. Eyes darted between Secret Service agents who shifted uneasily but didn't move. Across the room, Obama didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, hands folded loosely in front of him, the very image of composure. The contrast couldn't have been sharper: one man unraveling in real time, the other anchored in silence. For the first time all night, the audience stopped clapping. There was no applause now, only the sound of Trump's breathing, ragged and uneven, filling the microphone. The cameras caught it all, every red vein, every twitch, every word that would be replayed in millions of living rooms by morning. Obama waited. He let the weight of Trump's shouting settle into silence. Then he stepped forward, not with force, but with gravity. His voice was calm, steady, measured. "Leadership," he began, "isn't about who yells the loudest. It's about who keeps their dignity when the room is burning." The words floated through the hall like a current. The tension cracked, and for the first time that night, even those who came to cheer Trump found themselves holding their breath. Trump opened his mouth to interrupt, but the crowd erupted first. "Let him speak." The chant started from the back row, a few voices at first, then hundreds, then thousands. It rolled like thunder through the marble hall, a demand, a verdict, a reminder of who the room really belonged to. Obama didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply waited until the noise settled. Eyes locked on Trump, voice low but unshakable. "Tonight isn't about me. It isn't about you. It's about the American people." For the first time all evening, Trump had no reply. And the cameras caught that too. By dawn, the moment had already gone nuclear. CNN ran the clip on repeat, anchors struggling to hide their awe. Fox spun it as Obama hijacks the stage, while MSNBC called it a masterclass in restraint. But it wasn't just the newsrooms, it was everywhere. TikTok edits racked up millions of views within hours, slow-motion shots of Obama standing tall, the crowd chanting Trump frozen mid-blink. Twitter, or X as some now called it, became a battlefield of hot takes and memes. And then the hashtag started climbing. Decency says strength. By noon, it was the #1 trend worldwide. Millions of Americans were sharing the same 12-second clip, calling it the moment leadership spoke louder than volume. One viral tweet captured the mood best. Obama didn't raise his voice. He raised the room. Even those who disagreed politically had to admit it. Something about that night had shifted. It wasn't just two men on a stage anymore. It was a mirror held up to America. By noon, the moment had left Washington and swept into living rooms, classrooms, and highways across the nation. In a quiet hospital in Tulsa, a nurse replayed the clip on her phone during a night shift break. She whispered to her coworker, "That's how you lead without screaming." In Atlanta, a high school civics teacher paused the video in front of 30 wide-eyed students. On the whiteboard, she wrote "Leadership Volume." Then she turned to the class and asked, "What just happened here is history. Who we cheer for says who we are." Out on an endless stretch of highway in Nebraska, a truck driver leaned on his steering wheel, his CB radio buzzing with chatter. He muttered into the mic, "If a man can't control his temper, he can't lead my country." From coffee shops in Seattle to diners in Alabama, Americans weren't just watching a political clash, they were having a national conversation about character, dignity, and power. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the entire country was in the same room, debating what leadership truly meant. By dawn the next day, 7 simple words had escaped the room and seared themselves into history. History will remember who told the truth and who tried to silence it. It began as a quote buried deep in an op-ed by a Washington Post columnist. Within hours, it had spread like wildfire, projected across the glass facade of the Newseum in D.C., stenciled onto a mural in Detroit, painted overnight by a local artist, screen printed on T-shirts in Los Angeles before the sun even rose. Quoted in Sunday sermons from Dallas to Philadelphia, "Truth is not fragile," one pastor declared, "but men who fear it often are." Even late-night hosts repeated it, each with their own spin, some solemn, others biting. On TikTok, it became a soundbite anthem layered over footage of protest rallies and school debates. By evening, "Remember Who Spoke" was trending worldwide. Some people wore the line like armor. Others avoided it like fire. But no one, not even the 2 men who sparked it, could control where it went next. By the end of that week, America wasn't just watching 2 men anymore. They were watching 2 definitions of leadership collide. On one side, rage, the clenched jaw, the slammed fists, the tweets at 3 a.m., a vision of power built on volume, not values. On the other, dignity, a steady voice, a measured breath, a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. A reminder that real strength isn't about owning the room, it's about holding yourself when the room turns against you. Across diners in Ohio, classrooms in Georgia, and barbershops in Detroit, people whispered the same thing. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about who we are. By Sunday, a CBS poll showed 61% of Americans believed the moment had redefined what it means to lead. Because here's the verdict America reached, even if Washington hadn't said it out loud: strength is not the loudest voice. Strength is the last man standing with his dignity intact. In a world where noise often drowns out reason, this moment reminds us of one timeless truth. Real strength isn't measured by how loud you yell, but by how firmly you stand. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need dignity, calm, and the courage to stand by the truth, even when the storm rages. Leadership isn't about intimidating others. It's about inspiring them to believe in something greater than themselves. Remember this: you can't control the storm, but you can always control how you walk through it. If you believe dignity matters more than noise, if you believe truth deserves to be heard, then subscribe now and join us in uncovering the stories that change history. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from, because your voice matters here. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell together. Let's make sure these stories are never forgotten.